Shri Anil Nair and the policy circle, my fellow panelists, all very distinguished colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Jules once wrote about around the world in 80 days, and that was considered to be a great feat during those days. I have been asked to cover the world in 7 minutes, and I think I should get a medal for that. So let me try to, in the 7 minutes, give you a broad view of the world as we see it. So one, I believe that we are at an inflection point in history where there are very significant power shifts which are taking place. There is a view among international relations theorists that when a rising power reaches a level of, say, about 80% in terms of economic, military, and technological capabilities of the number one power, the power shift and a very significant power shift becomes inevitable. There is no way that you can avoid it. So this is why I'm saying that we are at an inflection point, because the rising power, particularly China, is already beyond that 80% of the US, capabilities. Now, that is, as I said, already happening with the China and the US. The rising power which wants to displace the existing superpower will obviously like to hasten that displacement by trying to ally itself with those who can buttress its power, and that is the logic behind the China-Russia relationship. That is why that relationship is so important and significant. Naturally, on the other side, the power which is sought to be displaced will want to prevent that from happening, and will also be looking for partners, allies in that process. And the India-US relationship falls very much into that category. Of course, US has many other partners. Now, this is something which, of course, is being characterized as a democratic coalition. That is, a coalition amongst democracies. As a rather cynical practitioner of foreign policy, I would say that it is actually at its core only strategic expediency. It has nothing to do with ideology. Being democracies does not ensure strategic convergence, and we have seen that through our own history. But being democracies can certainly reinforce strategic convergence, which is also something that characterizes India-US relations. But we should remember this distinction, that merely because we are democracy, it does not mean that somehow there is convergence. There are premature expectations of a China peak, that its economic, military, technological capabilities are growing more slowly, which is certainly true, or they are even plateauing at the existing level. This is, to my mind, wishful thinking. As an $18 trillion economy, in nominal terms, actually in PPP terms, is already beyond the United States of America. But if we take it just the notional figure of 18 trillion, even if you have a 2% to 3% growth, say for the next several years, China will be adding perhaps in India every couple of years. So let us not fool ourselves, what the level of asymmetry is between India and China. So the China challenge for India is here to stay, and the sooner we acknowledge that and try to deal with it, the better it is for us. Now, this does not mean that India has to acquiesce to Chinese dominance. I believe that if there is one country in the world which, in terms of its size, its population, its technological heft, has the ability to catch up or even overtake China, it is only India. No other country has that potential. So that's the good news that we have. We have already become more populous than China, and we'll have a much younger population over the next several decades than perhaps any other country. We are actually witnessing in India a technological leapfrogging which is taking place. And that's the other part of the good story. It is actually monumental in scale, the kind of transformation that is taking place in India in technological terms. There are gaps here and there, but generally speaking, there is that technological leapfrogging which is taking place. And this is certainly, very much apparent in terms of our digital, economy. The former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, a couple of years ago, he was in India, and he made this statement which many people thought was exaggerated. He said, India is at the threshold of a Cambrian explosion. Cambrian explosion is when, suddenly the earth saw a massive growth of, all kinds of species and vegetation. So his point was that India today is really at the threshold of that Cambrian explosion in terms of its ability to really use technology to completely transform itself. And he said no other country is at that point. Basically, the kind of the components of that Cambrian explosion were: one, Aadhaar card; two, geo, because it makes available connectivity, digital connectivity at rates which are unmatched anywhere in the world. So today you have more people in India connected to the internet and through their smartphones to social media than perhaps anywhere in the world. And that is still growing. And third, he talked about, financial technology. And you have seen the recent developments in the UPI, So he had a very positive outlook with regard to what India's potential was. Lastly, I would say, therefore, what is the geopolitical moment for India at this point of time? So take a leaf out of China's book. So in 1972, Nixon visited China. What was that particular geopolitical moment? Unlike today, where China and Russia is talking about no limits partnership, at that time they were actually very, very, sharp adversaries, I would say. Enemy countries, in fact. The United States of America reached out to China in order to deal with what it saw as the greatest security threat to the United States at that time. That was the Soviet Union. But what did China do? It utilized that requirement on the part of the US for an ally against the Soviet Union to really, become like a sponge absorbing technology, capital, knowledge from all over the world. So the 40-year sprint which you see from the 70s to today is a result of leveraging that geopolitical moment to completely transform itself. Today, still the knowledge capitals of the world are US, Japan, Europe. That has not changed even if they are in relative decline. You have today very close partnerships with all these countries. Why? Because they know, as I said right in the beginning, that is the only country which can probably give them countervailing presence against China is only India. So they have a stake in India's success. They have a stake in building up India's power. Your challenge for diplomacy is, how do I actually leverage that to really transform India itself? All the ingredients are there. So, yes, this is India's geopolitical moment. I hope that the G20 chairmanship is utilized to really bring about that change in India. Thank you for your attention.